1982. I think I wrote my first line of code and got my first computers in 1983. So I've been doing this for a long time. Uh, just kind of to cover what we're going to do here today, I'm going to give you a really quick intro to mob programming. I'm going to fly right through it, and then I'm going to discuss a question that always comes up. So let's see how fast we can get to that part, because this first part is kind of a recap on what we covered last time. I like to share this quote from Peter Block, but I'll just say this. I'm not here to tell you what to do or what you should do. I'm just here to share some ideas of things that I've done. So if I were to think that there was any value in me telling you what to do, that'd be pretty presumptuous of me. You're all in different situations. Um, Boy, I'm recognizing a lot of people here. It's so nice to see so many of my friends. Let's go on. Okay, so real quick, mob programming. It's all the brilliant minds working together on the same thing at the same time in the same space and at the same computer. And to me, this is the origin of Agile as an idea for programming. I think came out of people who are recognizing that we need to be able to collaborate to be able to do this work. We always collaborate unless we're writing software that only ourself is going to use, and only, if I'm writing something only I'm going to use, nobody else will ever see it. I can decide what I want to write. I can write the code. I can use the code. I can test the code, whatever. Um, Otherwise, I'm collaborating, because if anyone else is using my software, that's a collaboration of sorts. So the bigger the endeavor or the bigger the company, the more likely it is we're just one of many people who need to collaborate to do this. So I think they understood that if we're not working on the same thing, we're not collaborating. We can't. But if we're not working on it at the same time, it makes collaboration more difficult. And if we're not working on it in the same space, and nowadays that could mean remotely, then yeah, it makes it even more difficult. But mob programming brings us all together at a single computer. Again, it can be done remotely. And therefore, we are there at the same time, at the same moment, working on the same thing, uh, and all being together. So this is, I think, just accentuates the ability to be in collaboration. Conceptually, this is how I like to think it in the ideal state. Ideally, mob programming, we've gathered together all the skills and knowledge we have within the people who are working together to do the work we need to do. Everything we need to do is represented by somebody's knowledge or skills on the team we're working with. We go from start to finish on anything we do directly. We don't need to go find some information from someone else or go, bring someone else in to have a meeting. We don't need to do any of that sort of stuff. So real quickly, this is what it looks like in the ideal state. Because here is a tester, a product owner, who's also a developer on a different team. We're writing software for her team. A developer, a database expert, and two more developers. Although I think of everybody in this room as being a developer of the software we're working on. So those who I was calling developers, we might think of them as coders who understand how to take the part of our development that goes into code and create that. But we also have to have database experts, testers, product owners. So to me, this is an ideal team. Not always possible to get that. But it's not 5 people watching one person coding. That would be some kind of an interesting theater. So we need to have instead some protocol and mechanisms for doing this. And we used a mechanism that came from pair programming, where there's somebody at the keyboard and everyone else is I would consider the brain, the extended brain doing the development. The person at the keyboard is merely putting the stuff into the computer that the rest of the team is thinking of putting into the computer. And we use this guideline that came from Zuill and Falco. I learned this, I think, somewhere between 2007 and 8, maybe 9, somewhere in there. For an idea to go from somebody's head into the computer, it goes through someone else's hands. This requires we get pretty good at communicating, and it makes us become actually very sophisticated at communicating. Otherwise, it's pretty painful to do this. So we need some techniques. It seems crazy, but there are people now all over the world doing it. I'm just going to skip through real quick. One thing I'll point out is people often ask me, how do you keep everybody engaged when you're working this way? Well, look at these pictures. These are people in different teams all around the world. They just kind of naturally stay engaged. If people aren't engaged, they probably aren't important to what we're working on. And maybe they should be working with some other team where their skills are needed. So anyways, we'll just go through that real quick. I want to get, of course, it can be done remotely. And this is an example of a workplace that isn't doing programming, but is following the same basic idea. They've gathered together all the skills and the knowledge they need to do a mission. And that mission has to do with shooting rockets into space or whatever. And everybody's there gathered at the same time, conceptually in the same space because some people are spread around. They're doing it on this, they're working on the same thing, the single mission. And they're all looking at the same information. Each one of these workstations represents different expertise, but the overall mission, which is represented on those very large screens up at the top, that's what they're all focusing on. They're part of the bigger mission, and then they're bringing their expertise to that bigger mission. So why would we work this way? I usually do this as an exercise, but these are some of the things people say. There's a lot of knowledge sharing going on. We have continuous code and design review, many perspectives on the work. We get rapid feedback. We tend to focus on the right things, so we do less of the things that don't matter. This enhances the flow of the work. It eliminates queues and inventory, which means we're eliminating a lot of the waste that normally happens in product development. We end up with better solutions of higher quality, and we found it to be more fun, less stressful, more engaging. Well, it takes a lot of work to make it fun and less stressful, but once we get that, it's pretty straightforward. So another reason I ask or answer this from a different point of view, why would we work this way? Because the team decided to work this way. Nobody came to this team and said, you must work this way, or said, here's a new way you should try working. The team was figuring out, how are we going to better collaborate? And they landed on this idea that we ended up calling mob programming. Other people now call it ensemble programming, and I'm working on a new name for it. I'm not sure I'm going to do it, but I'm coming up with what I think would be more matching what I really meant. Because when I first started talking about this, I just called it whole team programming. I don't want to use that terminology, but something more like that. But let's go on. So this is where today's talk starts. I'm going to go through this pretty fast because I'm covering a lot of stuff. But the question I almost always get, and I got it the very first time I ever gave a talk on this, which is almost exactly 12 years ago at the Agile conference in Dallas, Texas at Grapevine. I think it was about August of 2012. Somebody asked that question, how can you provide how can you be productive with 5 people working at one computer? And I didn't know how to answer it. So I just said, I don't know. How does that matter? But I realized I needed to start talking about this. And we were paying attention to what we were doing, and this is what we noticed. If we work separately, this represents 5 people working in separate cubicles on their own tasks, and we add up their work, we get a certain amount of work done. Whatever that amount is, over the years, we probably can kind of have a feeling for what a typical day or two is like. When we start working together, we got a lot more done. But it wasn't just a lot more stuff. It was the more meaningful stuff. And that to me is way more important than more stuff. Because that kind of goes with the agile concept that, let's maximize the amount of work not done. That is really a brilliant concept. And it was better done. It was the things our customers wanted or our users wanted, and it was done in a way they liked. And it was of much higher quality. Well, I won't go into too much details about this, but we could see this had to do something with the concept of systems, how systems work. But I didn't like that term productive. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got to where we're going to be at today through a technique my dad had shown me when I was a kid. This is a picture of my dad when he was a kid, 20 years before I met him. I would have liked to have met him when he was a kid, but that didn't work out. So here's the thing. He used to say this, a good question isn't for answers, it's for finding a better question. I'm pretty sure he didn't make that up. And he used to tell me things like, none of this is original with me. So I make sure I say that a lot too. Like, I didn't invent any of this stuff. But I didn't like this question that I was first given. So I want to find a better question. I'm going to go through a series of 3 or 4 steps that get us to the better question. So the first thing is, I didn't like that word productive. And my father would say that if they ask you a question that you don't like the way it was phrased, you might want to rephrase it into something you're willing to answer. So that's the beginning of this. I want to talk about productivity. 3 different words. Efficiency is about utilization. Productivity is about producing something, getting something done. Effectiveness is about getting the right things done. And this comes from my dad's thinking. He used to say, I'd rather work slowly on the right thing than quickly on the wrong thing. Although when we're in the world we're in with software development, we often have to work on the wrong thing for a while before we get to even discover it was the wrong thing. We want a process that gets us there quicker. So effectiveness isn't very good because we can measure it through busy work. In other words, if everybody's busy, then efficiency, pardon me, I got the words wrong there. With efficiency, it just means we're getting a lot done in the time we have. And usually we measure that through something like busy work. Is everybody busy? Productivity is, well, we're getting some things done, but maybe they're the wrong things. And effectiveness is about getting the right things done. And maybe effectiveness would be being very efficient in our productivity, and we're working on the right things. So I want to change the question to just get rid of that productivity. At least this is something I want to consider. But I still want a better question, and I'm going to go through 2 or 3 steps getting there. The next step in my dad's process was whoever asked you the question, you've got to understand their point of view, because you'll answer the wrong question if you don't understand the point of view. So whenever somebody would ask that question afterwards, if I was at a meeting or at a user group, I would go up to them and ask them, can you tell me what your thinking is, why you would ask that question? And they usually kind of think that separating people is very effective. It's a productive. We're getting a lot of things worked on. And they will say it this way: I want to get 5 things done, not just one thing. Well, I was just trying to get their point of view, but internally I'm thinking, yeah, but you're not getting 5 things done. You're getting 5 things worked on, not 5 things done. So I hope you can see that's a slight difference there. They will also say it this way: I don't want to pay one person to do the work of 5. Or excuse me, pay 5 people to do the work of 1. What the problem with this, boy, I'm getting things jumbled up today. The problem with this is that we are not doing the work of 1 when we're working as a team only. We're going to do everybody's work, but we're going to do it in a much more collaborative manner. And I think that brings us a lot of advantages. So I think their point of view isn't necessarily correct, but my father's next step is now you flip it over. You have to have at least 2 points of view to understand how you might answer it. From my point of view, the question is this: can we be effective if we separate the people that should be working together? So the one point of view is, how can we be effective if we put everybody in front of one screen? And I'm now asking, well, how can we be effective if we separate everybody? Now, people will often ask me, are there any studies? Is there any research that proves that 5 people working together is better than 5 people working separately? And my response to that is pretty simple. That would be the same study that proves that 5 people working separately is better than 5 people working together. In other words, they already have 5 people working separately, 5 people working separately with no evidence that that's better than having them all work together. Where's the proof? Where's the study? It would be the same study that proves one way or the other. Well, I don't have the wherewithal. I'm not an academic. I'm not a researcher. I can't do that research, but I wanted to still get a feeling for this, and this is what I did. First of all, when we separate people, we often don't only separate them by what they're working on and when they're working on it and the cubicles they're in, we often separate them by the department they're in. If we have a database person in one department, a tester in another department, front-end people in a department, maybe the people who do deployments in another department, the people who are the product owners or business analysts are in another department, the communication lines are really choppy. For me to talk to someone in some of those departments, I have to make an appointment. I can't just walk up to them and talk with them. So the separation can be rather drastic in some cases when you bring a team together that's a person from each of these different departments. So this led to the better question, and I don't have a slide for this. The first better question would be, how could we prove, or how could we at least sense the difference between working these 2 different ways? So we could get a feeling for which would be better. If I can't do that research, and I can't, there are people researching this at different organizations and universities, but hopefully that'll come out someday. Here's the thing. I thought if I asked this question, it could give me a way to judge the difference between different ways of working. If we just ask, what are the things that destroy our effectiveness? And when I do this as an exercise, I usually get some kind of response like this. And this was a group of 20 people in a 3-minute exercise. They came up with 50 post-it notes. Some of them are a little duplicate, but the first one I want to point out is needless meetings. And I would take off the word needless because I really very rarely see a meeting we needed to have. But look at this one: context switching, workflow interruptions, distractions, and multitasking. Those are all very closely grouped together. I love these first two: fatigue and hunger. Interesting. So there's a lot of things that destroy our effectiveness. I like this pair: too much noise, too quiet, two very different points of view. External dependencies, lots I hear on dependencies, unrealistic expectations, lack of context or understanding, an upsetting work environment. When I was young, I worked in different fields where sometimes people would get into fights, and I'm not talking about shouting at each other. That's a very upsetting work environment. Yikes. Analysis paralysis, distractions, bugs, technical debt, on and on. So now, if we could gather that, and usually I do this, I ask this as a question like this: in the last few weeks or months, what are the things that have destroyed your effectiveness, made it difficult for you to be effective? Just in the last few months. I usually notice this though. Once I've gathered that list at a place, we can now judge different ways of working. Does this way of working have these problems, or does this way of working have these problems? With mob programming, this is what we noticed. Many of those problems, or really their symptoms of problems, faded away when we started working, doing mob programming. Now, I thought that that's a very interesting thing we noticed almost right away. And you'll see I made quite a powerful animation. I'll show it to you again. Many of these things faded away when we started working as a team. You can see I put a lot of time into that. So the point being, I can look at these two different ways of working, and with a team that's working really well collaboratively against a team that's not, a lot of those problems go away. The need for meetings, the multitasking, so on and so on. So now I had a way to compare. And one of the big problems, the big communication problems I first noticed back in 1999, I was working at a company where we were having a lot of communication problems. And we started studying it. Why are we having these problems? And the biggest one we found, and I think it's verifiable by other thinkers in this industry now, is what I call the question queue time. Any queuing. But the question queue time I defined as this: the amount of time that we must wait to get an answer to a question that is blocking us. If somebody asks, if I have a question to get answered, let's say from a product owner, and I go to them and I get the answer back, the amount of time I must wait is the amount of time I'm in a queue. So if I send that product owner an email and saying, hey, we've got a question about this thing we're working on, we can't figure it out, and we don't hear back from them for 2 hours, we've been sitting in a queue for 2 hours. We've been waiting for 2 hours. Okay, we can draw, and this, of course, this waiting is waste. And we could draw a value stream map that shows us this. If we just take this as typical, what I call a value stream map, I learned this from Mary Poppendick back in 2003 from her book, Lean Software Development. If you just draw this on any weighting that you have, if you draw that top line as we're getting work done, and then we are not getting work done, then we're working, then we're not working, this is a value stream map. So we can, on this one, whenever we stop working, it's because we have an answer. We're waiting for an answer. When it finally comes back to us, we can get back to work. So if we took this, you can see if we compressed out the waiting time, we only really worked half the day, although we were there all day long. Well, there's a way we deal with that. We'll talk about that for a second. But as an example here, hypothetically, what if we got one question for every hour we work? So we work an hour, and now we're blocked, and we can't work till we get another hour going. So, oops, I just got this Slido came up for me. I move that out of the way. Okay, so there is somebody who probably needs to mute, it sounds like there. I'm going to go on. Okay. So in an 8-hour day, if we never get blocked, every time we get a question, we just continue on. It'll be a very effective day. What if we get blocked for 2 minutes? We're only wasting a little bit of time during the day, But what if we get blocked for a whole 10 minutes? We've wasted an hour each day. What if we're blocked for an hour each time? We've wasted half the day. I do a poll at some companies when I visit them, and usually the results will be it takes about an hour and a half, an hour to 2 hours to a day or 2 days to get an answer. If that's the average, we're spending most of our time not working. Well, we do have a way to deal with that. We'll talk about that. How do we typically solve for this? Well, what we typically do is we bring on another task. And when we bring on that other task, we can fill in the time we're not busy. But inventory is a problem. We've brought on inventory, and inventory is also a waste. Inventory is anything we've worked on that hasn't yet been delivered to a customer that's using it, that nobody is yet getting value. That is a waste. Now, people will argue, they often do, well, it's not a waste because we need to build this. It takes us a while, and then it will deliver value. That's only partly true. It may need to be reworked. It may have all the problems of inventory that we see in lean manufacturing. Things get out of date quicker than we hope, and we never delivered value. There's lots of other ways it can be waste, but this is how we normally deal with that. We pick on that other work, and then it looks like we're busy all the time, and we are, but we're also blocked all the time. This is a trick we play on ourselves, and I'll really make it clear. It's not usually just one other thing, because when we get blocked on that other thing, we bring something else into work. So now we got 3 or 4 things that adds to our cognitive load. There's nothing good about this. We dealt with the symptom. We're not busy enough. We didn't deal with the problem, which is we're not getting answers to questions promptly. Which one is worth solving? Not the busyness problem, the effectiveness problem. Okay, so how did we solve for this? That's a trick question. In mob programming, that was one of the things that faded away. You saw that marvelous animation I made that showed that things faded away. Well, this is one of the things that faded away. As long as the person we had a question for was on our team. And this is when we discovered we got to consider a lot more people as being on our team. The first thing I noticed was testing. We always had weights about testing. So the first thing I did was I hired a tester onto the team. So if the tester's on our team, we're not waiting to get a test run before we deploy our work. But we noticed there were 3 or 4 other roles that were not on the team. We would get 0 queue time when the question was for somebody on our team. But if they weren't officially a full class, first class member of our team, a full-fledged member of the team, then we had waiting time. And we noticed this with our product owners. Our product owners would come up with the ideas we're supposed to work on. And then as we're working on it, whenever we get a question, we got to call them, send them a message, bring them over. And we noticed that was the biggest waste of time that we had, was that waiting. And we talked to a couple of the product owners who were really wanting to get their work done quickly and asked them, please interact with us instantly throughout the day. And we got a couple who would guarantee they would respond within 2 minutes if we ever had a question. And that eventually it led to us having some of them spend an hour or 2 with us during the day. So they became more of a full-fledged member of the team. They eliminated the wasting time for waiting when it came to their role on the team. However, we at that time decided this was what we were attempting to get as a one-piece flow. We got it automatically when we were working together with the team all together, and we could get it slightly artificially when we had to call somebody in. So we really liked it. We started thinking these people belong on the team. And that was the testers, the product owners, the people who do the deployments or set up the environments we would work in. And then also the database experts. Those were the main areas where we needed to go off the team to get answers, and it was adding to our queue time. So this is about flow. That is the largest word in this talk, because that's what this talk is about. You can see I use that to emphasize flow. Now, when we started studying flow, we found there were actually 2 different kinds of flow at first. And then we realized there's actually 4 or 5 different uses of the word flow in software development, like data flow or workflow, and all these other kinds of flows that had more to do with just lean flow. So the 2 that we really saw were critical was psychological flow and lean flow. So we started studying these things, and we were worried about something. That flow, which was described in the term was coined by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I'm not sure how to say his name, but here's the thing. This is how he defines it. Flow is a highly effective state that we get into when we're fully immersed or fully focused on on a thing. So everything else disappears from our brain. We're focused on this one thing, and we really get in the groove, or we call it being in the zone. And I've seen this in myself, doing things like music, playing music, practicing music, performing music. I used to do that when I was a kid. In doing artistic things, I used to be a designer of advertising graphics and painter of signs and stuff like that. But also other things I've done in my life. There's a lot of things I do. Even playing a video game, you can get into a kind of flow. Well, we were getting a little worried. Are we destroying this flow or being in the zone that developers like? So we asked this question. But actually, I wanted a better question. But we did try to answer this for ourselves. And this is what we decided. Because this was voluntary, that each individual could join the team and work with the team on their own schedule, then it was up to them to decide, am I losing my flow right now? I'm going to go be alone for a while. It was up to them to decide how could they get into the flow they wanted to be in. But we were noticing something else, and we wanted a better question. So that better question turned out to be this: is there another kind of flow? Because we were watching us as a team being in the flow, where things just happened for us, and we went straight through stuff from start to finish. Whenever we were getting ready to get blocked by a question, somebody already had the answer before we needed to ask it. So this was a powerful thing, being in this team psychological flow. And we didn't find any studies that showed anything about this at that time. There actually were at least a couple going on, and one had already been published, and we eventually found it. We started doing our own study by collecting pictures, people working as a team, and reading stories and books. You can see this is actually a real bookshelf behind me. This is not a fake picture of a bookshelf. Here's a book on leading teams. I've read, oops, pulled out my ear thing. I've read at least a dozen, maybe two. There's Wisdom of Teams. There's Teaming by Amy Edmondson. Oh, and this is probably the best one. The Complete Nonsense of Edward Lear. Has nothing to do with teaming, but it's a 100 years, 200-year-old nonsense book. Anyways, let's go on. I love having books nearby. I see this as being in flow. Now, these kids, when they were kids, they were clearly, when they're performing, in a kind of flow, just like Me-Eyed Chicks and Me I was talking about, but as a team. And here's another one. This is Xerox PARC. They have a completely different kind of flow than the noisy, active flow this is. This is a kind of a brainstorming session. There's other ways to call it, talk about that. And the last one, I love this one the most. This is a group of people all gathered to do a very important, groundbreaking sort of operation, I think 1944. I won't go into any details, but in this picture, there are 10 people at least that I could count. And of those 10 people, there are 3 surgeons, a supervising surgeon, and 4, 5, 6 technicians. Each one of them is there, focused on this operation, ready to do what they need to do at the moment it needs to be done. This is a kind of team flow. They can't get in the way of each other, and nobody has to wait for anything. Imagine that manager that said, I won't pay 5 people to do the work of one, and he's now on a gurney because he needs a heart operation. And we wheel him into this room, and he looks around. Would he say, I'm not paying 5 people to do the work of one? I don't want to pay for all those extra technicians and extra doctors. This just takes one doctor. We're accepting of the idea of a team working on us in this situation. We want the very best care we can get. Okay, so then we found this paper. It's now also a book you can buy called Team Flow, a couple hundred pages of a paper. But look at these things that they came up with. If we have a collective ambition, a common goal, aligned personal goals, and high skill integration, we have a situation where we could achieve a kind of team flow. We need to have open communication and a safety to communicate all of our necessary ideas. We get a mutual commitment and a sense of unity. This builds over time, but we also almost instantly get this sense of joint progress. We're now seeing things going from start to finish instead of, I'm done with mine, but I can't deploy it yet because they got to finish their thing, whatever. Mutual trust, we need to have a holistic focus. We're focused on the big thing as a group with each of our specialties. Okay, we felt we were getting this. This is what we thought we're getting. And once I read that paper, yeah. But there's the other kind of flow, which is lean flow. With lean flow, as in manufacturing, they describe it, this is really a simplified definition, as every piece or the complete production of any one piece from start to finish without the blocking that would come from the queuing and the inventory and all the other wastes. If we can get this perfectly, and we never can, then we would achieve a perfect kind of flow. Can we get this in software development? Well, of course, there's an important book that was written on that called The Principles of Product Development Flow by Donald Reinertson, and I've always got that copy nearby. I will give you a tip. If you are in the office, buy this book, put it on your desk. Other people will think he must be smart or she must be smart just because you have the book. And then every day put an extra post-it note in there so it looks like you're actually reading it. That would be a cool thing to do, because then everybody will think, hey, they're pretty smart. I've read it 4 times. I still am having trouble digesting it all. But I'm going to talk about one aspect. He talks about queuing waste. That's very closely related to the question queue time. Queues are the root cause of the majority of economic waste in product development. Just imagine if that actually is true. What would you do if that was true? What if it's wasting 1% of our time? What if it's wasting 50% of our time? I've talked to several executives in very large manufacturing and software development companies that do product development, who have told me that they believe it's about 90% of their waste is waiting. That's not waiting for the question queue time only. It's waiting for all kinds of things. And if this is true, that's a nice place to concentrate. The big thing I want to cover is queues extend the cycle time. The longer the cycle time, that's the time it goes from when you start on something to when you're done, the longer it is, the more problems you're going to have. You can read the book to see what he thinks about it, but I would say just that longer cycle time introduces endless problems. So flow in software development, I like to define it this way. Each idea will flow directly from start to finish. From idea to finish is the way I like to say it. If I say we need a new page where they can select their region and then they can see the options in their region, the moment I have that idea, for me, that's when the cycle time starts. How long will it take before a user is using that is our cycle time. I want that to go directly. We come up with an idea, we're capable of getting it in whatever form we can almost directly that day, the next day. What if we could do it in less than a week anyways? If we do that directly without the queuing, without the inventory, and some of the other big wastes that are very closely related, the distractions, the interruptions, the context switching, and the multitasking. Those overload us cognitively. Those last 4 things overload us so that we can't think straight. There's a thing called the Zeigarnik effect I read about a few years ago. It was originated like 100 years ago. But the idea is until you finish something, there's a place in your brain that keeps the details of it. And you're using up processing space. Now, people, we've heard for years that you only use 10% of your brain. I don't know if that's true. I'm probably lucky if I'm using 2.5% of my brain. But you get the picture. It's like whatever we've got there that we're using, we don't want it clogged up with all this other stuff. If we can go directly from idea to delivered thing, we're lessening the cognitive load. If we don't have 5 things we're working on once and we're going to 5 meetings during the day to these different things. I was in a company recently where I took a poll of the software developers, the people actually that write the code. And I asked them, how many hours do you spend per day in meetings? And their average came out something like 5.5 hours in meetings where they were talking about things they were going to do or should do or reviewing things that were done. Is that any time to do any real work? I don't think so. That's why we're having so many problems out there. Well, this, of course, can be drawn linearly. If we go from start to finish, we go through some steps. I put this drawing in here because if you go to an Agile talk, that's something they proclaim as Agile, and they don't put a circle in it, that's not really Agile. So you can judge how the quality of the Agile talk. Do they have a circle? There's your circle. That's to prove. But this is not really what it is. Because the idea we start with, I want to get to being able to have it in use immediately so we can evaluate that. But there's a lot more we evaluate as we go. By the time we've turned it into a story, which means we've talked about it a little bit and came up with an idea of what this might look like, and we start designing and coding, we may have learned a lot already to say, we better not do this, or yeah, let's go ahead with it, or we need to change this or that. So we have learning going on all the time. But if we can go directly from idea to deploying into real use, so we can get that feedback, that means 2 or 3 hours to me. We start doing that, where we originated the mob programming concept, that's what we started doing. Well, I want to scoot through the rest of this within the next 5 or 6 minutes, maybe, so we can get to a few questions. Let's see if we can do it. I just have to double my talking speed. So we found that when we achieved flow, we were now almost automatically paying attention to the right things. We were being effective. That's why I talk about it this way in this talk. Part of being effective means you got to do a lot of discovery. With software development, you don't just take a requirement and say we're going to write that. We're going to learn in the writing of it what we got wrong in defining it. So it never works that way. We have to have some process of discovery. I want it to be full time, continuous discovery. But almost all of the bad stuff, the ineffective stuff, wasted away. It faded for us. We were no longer wasting time in meetings. We didn't have excess inventory. We were working on one thing at a time. I love some of these I captured. These were just some of them that I talked with the team about. We no longer had merging problems, at least within the team. There was no arguing, discussing rather than trying things. I have this propensity, that's the wrong word, kind of a focus on let's try this thing that we're talking about instead of just talking about it. Work that doesn't need to be done, I can make you a long list of that. Like doing a diagram for another department that will never even look at it. And we've had a lot of that to do. Doing the wrong thing, we can talk about that some other time. Failure demand, that means fixing the things we got wrong in the first place. Meetings like bugs. Meetings, we're no longer doing meetings. The coordination no longer need to happen. Prioritizing of things didn't need to happen. All this faded away for us. We became a lot more effective. So we believe we were achieving lean flow and eliminating these queues and the excess inventory. And that's why I think we're getting to the point where we can answer that original question. How can we be effective with 5 people at one computer? With mob programming, we optimize for the flow of the work rather than the output of the individual. Most organizations are focused on the output of the individual. Highly wasteful. This means we're going to do it. We're going to get all the queuing. We're going to get all the unnecessary waiting. We're going to have all the excess inventory, all the interruptions, all those problems. We would get those if we optimize for the individual. That means we've taken, for example, the database person, and we get them focusing on only doing database work. We take the front end person, they're focused only on doing front end work. When we collaborate on these things, we no longer care about how much an individual is doing. What we care about is the work flowing nicely. So I think of this way, we're not trying to get the most out of each person. We're trying to get the best from each person. Very different point of view. Now this goes back in my life to my very youngest age of working, 12 years old, when my boss was asking me to keep my eyes out, to look for things we could improve around the workplace where I was working. He was asking a 12-year-old, he was probably 55, he's asking a 12-year-old to take that responsibility. That's what we're after, is to give everybody the best chance at excelling, at being their best person in their work. So I can answer that original question. How can we be effective with 5 people at one computer? I think it's a combination of these flows, which we originally thought it was flow versus flow, lean flow versus psychological flow. But in discovering this stuff, we found this. So we have space for psychological flow, but we also have space for the team psychological flow, and we're achieving the lean flow. They come together. And we can answer that question. We are achieving flow. I think that is, I think, what has happened to us. So I'm going to close this with one last slide by a brilliant joke that one of the developers at one of my workshops shouted out when I got to that part in this talk. I think this is the funniest thing. They just said, hey, hey, that's flow plus plus. And I thought that's just such a perfect programmer's way. It's psychological flow plus team psychological flow plus lean flow. We have them all. And I don't think we could achieve mob programming if we didn't get the advantages of all these things. So there we go. I think I've covered enough. I always like to get this slide in somewhere, but we're essentially at the end of the talk. And I think we have enough time for a few questions.
Okay, well, I've got the questions on Slido here. You should be able to see it in the list of things on the right-hand side. If
Did I stop sharing my screen?
Oh, I really like this slide.
Okay, well, let's leave that up there and let's see what goes. Okay.
Okay, so first question here is, do you suggest to apply mob programming to everything or just to things that have a certain level of complexity?
I don't suggest applying mob programming to everything. You have to find what it's appropriate for in your organization or in your environment. But I would say this, it's worth trying with everything. Because when we first started doing it, we thought this was, because the way we started was one team member had a problem with a project and they wanted everyone to look at it together. So we got together, look at it, and we'd already been practicing collaborating on coding, not to do mob programming, but more to do pair programming because mob programming wasn't a thing. And we started working on it together. And it was a really complex thing. So we thought, well, let's keep working on this over the next few days or week we did. But we thought this was for the more complex stuff. But as we tackled the more complex stuff, easy stuff would come along and somebody would say, oh, I'll go do that. And they'd go off and do it. And after a few months of having done it that way, we started realizing that there were a lot of little things that came along that was stealing our time away. So we thought, let's look at the easy things together. And we started doing that. And guess what happened? We started realizing patterns where we could say, we think that could be automated. So at least looking at the easy things helped us to see the pattern as a group that we could automate stuff that we were currently just doing as grunt work or boring work. So I don't know what to tell you. I'd say explore that, experiment with that. I work with a couple dozen teams over the last year. I've been doing long-range coaching over months. And what we found was that once you get good at having a flow together, you can tackle all of your work this way. And that's what we did. So we turned into a team that did almost everything this way. But it doesn't mean that you have to. That's just what we experienced. So let's go ahead and hopefully that answered that. Mr. Anonymous, Mrs. Anonymous, I'm not sure.
So next question. In today's world, with everyone remote, what challenges does this pose to us when we want to try and get teams to try this?
The biggest challenge that I have seen is time zones. Other than that, almost everything can be worked through. Matter of fact, I've been spending a lot of time in the last couple of weeks, a month, writing down my thoughts on remote mob programming that I'm going to put into a new edition of the book that I wrote. And most of the other things can be dealt with. Another big problem is really crummy internet throughput. You know, the combination of bandwidth and speed, connectivity speed. If you don't have good, bandwidth, then you're going to have a problem. Let's see if I can think of it. So you need a protocol for discussing things with each other, because if you when you're sitting with each other, someone turns to you, you can tell they're getting ready to ask you something. You know, there's cues that we pick up on with people all around us. We're sitting side by side. It's easy to have a conversation. When we're working remotely, we get the voice. When two of us try to talk, it can be a mess. So we need some kind of protocol. Some people I've seen, I used to keep them right here, use it like a system of cards. You might hold up a red index card, and that indicates I have something urgent to say. And then somebody will say, okay, it's Woody's turn. Maybe a yellow card means I've got something to share, but I can wait a few minutes. So ways to communicate that we have something to say, but everybody's got to keep contributing. We've brought everyone together. If we're not all contributing, and that's harder to do. One last thing is whiteboards. Boy, I love having a physical whiteboard. I've learned to use these remote whiteboards, and they're not as tactile. Is that the right word? They don't give you the same experience, but they're better than nothing. So yeah, that's probably the biggest challenge. There might be some others that are escaping my brain right now. Let's try another question or two before I run out of time. Hopefully that answered.
Does this apply only to software coding, or would it apply for work on other IT projects, non-software? For example, product teams providing DevOps.
I actually know of many teams that do that kind of specific work, and they do it as a mob. Cool. So at one place I worked for quite a while, we actually put together pairs in that kind of, it's odd to me to think of having a separate DevOps team. I think that belongs on the team of developers. But in that case, this was before DevOps kind of stuff became a thing. And they would work in pairs. That way, there's always somebody who knows what anything that got worked on. They have at least some kind of memory of it. But yeah, it can work for other things in IT, definitely, but also in many other. For example, I think firefighting as a team, let's say your house is burning down, it's probably better to get a team of firefighters than say send one firefighter that fire. We'll send one firefighter that fire. Yeah, almost everything we do in our lives involves collaboration. Watch this. The next time you're walking through a crowded area, let's say an airport or a bus station or anywhere there with a lot of people, and just watch the pattern of people walking. They naturally organize and collaborate in a way where you very rarely see people just slam into each other. It's because we are collaborating in almost everything we do. I played music as a kid. I worked on construction crews when I was young. I did landscaping as a kid. Landscaping was something I did for 4 or 5 years. I worked I had sign shops. Almost everything I've ever done had teams that did the work in a very collaborative manner. When I got to software, I was put on a team in my second official job. I was put on a team. There were 200 developers. I was on a team of 8 developers. We never did anything that resembled teamwork whatsoever. Imagine if you went out on a sport field and the one person comes out carrying a baseball gear, someone else is carrying a soccer ball, somebody else has got a cricket bat, someone's got a tennis racket. Are we going to play a game together? That's kind of what it felt like. It's like, we're not really playing a game. We're just a bunch of sports people who got together at the same location. Teamwork is something we do almost in every aspect of our life, except in things like software development. So, there are things like people write books alone, but my wife, who did all these beautiful illustrations for me, she writes children's books. It's a collaborative effort. If she's illustrating somebody else's book that they've authored, that's a collaborative effort. Then there's a book designer. There's a couple editors. There's a whole bunch of people who are working together on this effort. That's collaboration. How good they collaborate is what we're talking about here. What can we do that makes collaboration the best we can have? It's really great for everyone. Okay, let's go on. I hope I'm answering the questions.
These are great. So here's a question I think a lot of people have. For a dev team that's integrated with front-end JavaScript devs and then back-end Python devs, or substitute your languages for it, can we effectively mob together while you still got the skill and knowledge differences?
Yeah, that's what I would want. Now, you don't need to have that. You could have a front-end mob and a back-end mob and a testing mob still. But my preferred, the ideal situation to me has been when we've had all the skills and knowledge together. Because if you're writing back-end stuff that the front-end people will never touch, they never use, they never look at, you're probably not, there's no need to collaborate. But if the front-end people, and if there's front-end people writing front-end stuff that's going to use back-end stuff that back-end people are writing, and there's going to be some people writing the database parts and someone else coming up with the requirements, those are all related. That's cohesive. Those things are being attracted to each other, and we artificially separate them. But if the back-end people are working something completely unrelated, then no, you wouldn't want to work as a team. But if it's related, and where we originated this idea, I don't know if I had a slide in this talk today, but at Hunter Industries, we worked on a team. We attempted to be fully cross-functional on our teams. We bring together the people who are going to work on this thing. All the ones we need for this thing are there together.
So I'm trying to understand where would you define those? Is it based on whether you can deliver that unit of work? If you can deliver it just in the back end, then there's no sense to have other people that aren't related to it. Is it the unit of work for the customer that drives how you shape the teams, or what?
That's going to be up to each organization to figure out. Okay. So if, for example, if somebody came to me and said, we need this thing that will display that somebody can go to a website that we don't yet have that displays all the patents we have and keeps them updated. Okay, well, who do we need to write that? That's the people that are going to work together, right? Because if somebody else is working on an effort that's going to keep track of, how many pipes and what length they are that we have in our inventory, that's a different team working on a different thing. Okay. So if we're working on this, and then we're going to have some back end stuff, we're going to have some front end stuff, We're going to have some data needs. We're going to have a product owner who's the expert. We're going to have a tester doing the testing. Whoever is going to be involved in that, that's conceptually, those are the people that should be collaborating at the highest or best level they can collaborate. I'm just going to shove that in. When I was a kid, I lived in a neighborhood, in California here, things were growing, and you could go to any one house that somebody was building. They would barely start doing tract houses around here. So it would be an individual builder building a house over here, and 3 blocks away, a different builder building over there. Those teams aren't going to collaborate. But when you're in that one, and we'd go and watch them working, they're collaborating all the time, carrying wood together, holding stuff up, somebody with a forklift and all that stuff. You would see that on their effort, they're collaborating. If they're not collaborating, what happens is things slow down. If you show up and you're supposed to do the plumbing, but the framers aren't there, that you're going to need to drill holes through the framing, and that's not there yet, then you're going to have a queuing. You're going to need to leave, come back again when that's ready. And they kind of work together because as they put the framing in, the plumbers would be drilling holes. I watched all this as a little kid. It's like a lot of this work was done kind of all the workers around there at the same time. Not always. The person laying the foundation, they come in first. The people doing the grading, they came in before. Some of that work was separated. Some of it isn't. We're just trying to be as collaborative as possible. There's no ideal situation that I could say works at any two different places. I hope I kind of covered that.
There's a question here from the chat I see. It was asking if mob programming runs into issues with buy-in from management when individuals are evaluated based on individual contributions. So you have a team producing great work, but management isn't able to give anyone on the team an exceeds expectation or above beyond rating. Because have you experienced that?
Sure. Mob programming just does not solve the extremely dysfunctional management in the world. Okay? Deming, who is long past this world, wrote about this stuff. He's got beautiful quotes. So let's make it clear. If you are individually rating the people in your organization, you are automatically creating an organization that will not be collaborating. If you're judging me against someone else, I have to pay attention to making me look good. This is problematic. I've seen this over and over again. If you are doing performance reviews in your organization, and most organizations are, so I'm calling out every organization in the world, you've set up an environment of high dysfunction. So you got to deal with that. Mob programming doesn't solve that. Mob programming tells you what's wrong with that, but it doesn't solve that for you. If you've got a company, let's just say you have 1,000 employees, and they all come to the same place to work together. Why did you do that? If you don't want them working together, if instead you want them competing with each other. If you have a team of 5 people and you tell them, look, I don't care how well you work together. I just want to see who could drive the most nails into these boards. You're not going to see people saying, could you pass me the hammer? They're going to steal the other guy's hammer so they can't even hammer. You get the picture. We are setting ourselves up for a kind of failure that's built in. Boy, I'm getting really aggressive about this right now, but this is really a problem. Most organizations, go ahead.
Let me ask 2 other questions because I want to get a little bit further down the list. But that great stuff there. 2 other questions. How difficult is it to implement mob program? How difficult is that to do? And what's the ideal number of people to be involved in a team?
So the first thing is that if people want to collaborate and they're focused on treating each other kindly with consideration and respect, it's not that hard to do. It can take time to learn. There are no rules to mob programming. The closest thing to a rule is what I shared from Llewellyn Falco. For an idea to go from someone's head to the computer, goes through someone else's hands. But that's just a rule I follow for myself, or a guideline. I don't force that on anyone else. So you can figure this out. I've written some material. I've got a little book that's available on at LeanPub. And there's lots of people doing talks about this and stuff. It's not that hard to learn to do. There was a second half to that question.
The ideal size.
The ideal size. So I used to kid when anybody asked me, what's the ideal size of the team? Say, as long as they could fit through the door, then we can work. That's a joke because the point is, you're really asking about the number of people, not the size of the people. But here's the thing. It's not a number. The number is irrelevant. What's important is that we do our best to get all the skills and knowledge we need onto the team. If that can be done with one person, then they can work solo. That's almost impossible in a modern work environment. If it can be two people, that again, almost impossible. There's usually product knowledge skills, front end skills, back end skills, all kinds of other programming skills, data skills, so on. So there's many, many, many different kinds of skills we need to have. So when we have everything we need to work without blocking, without the question queue time, without interrupting our flow ever, that's the right number. I've worked with as many as 14 on a single effort. And we calculated afterwards that if we had done it in the traditional manner, something that took us 3 days to do would have taken us 3 months to do, because of the meetings, the emails, the non-discussion discussions where we're sending back and forth, sending communications and never communicating. Rapid deployment, rapid feedback is not available in that environment. So there we go. So the right number of people is going to be, do we have all the knowledge and skills we need? And we're not overly redundant. In other words, if somebody's sitting there never doing anything, never contributing, never learning, then maybe they could go work on something else. So that number will adjust to fit the current work we're doing.
So Woody, this has been great. We're going to have to wrap it up. I appreciate your passion. We would love to hear you talk more. Thank you so much for taking this time with us. And I really, really appreciate it, and wish you well in your travels.
Thank you much. I had a great time. It was great to see some of my old friends here. They're not really they're not as old as I am, but they're friends I've had for a long time. That was a real pleasure.
Well, thanks again. I hope to see a lot of you next week.
All righty.